Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul.
Hi, my name is Yusra Masawi, and today I want to talk about something that lingers under the surface of so many movies, books, and pop culture moments. Something that continues to affect how we see young girls, how we define beauty, and how we understand power. This is the Lolita effect. The Lolita effect is a term coined by Madame Gigi Durham in her 2008 book, The Lolita Effect, the media sexualization of young girls and what we can do about it. Durham outlines how mass media has long sexualized young girls and encouraged them to evaluate their worth based on adult male approval. This conditioning is often disguised as empowerment, but it really does is distort a girl's understanding of her identity, her agency, and her boundaries. Durham breaks this down into 5 particularly dangerous myths. Girls don't choose boys, boys choose girls, and only the attractive ones. Number 2 is there's only one kind of attractive, slender, curvy, white beauty. The third myth is that girls should work hard to become that version of attractiveness. Number 4 is the younger a girl is, the sexier she can be. And finally, sexual violence can be erotic. These myths don't just appear in magazines or films, they shape how we grow. They make girls think their values based on how others look at them, especially men. And when those others are significantly older men, the damage goes even deeper. So let's ask ourselves some honest questions. Why is it so normalized for young girls to crave adult male validation? How did media become the primary lens through which we view desirability and maturity? And how does this all culminate in the romanticization of what are clearly predatory dynamics? I read Lolita when I was still forming my identity, and the way I came into contact with the book is quite interesting. When I was 12 years old, I was a ferocious reader, and I had all but $5 to my name. I decided to cross Lolita off my to-be-read list and find my own way to get the book for $5. So I did what any broke 12-year-old girl does, and I searched up the novel on OfferUp, and I found a seller near me who was willing to drop off the book to my house. With $5 in hand, I awaited this seller's arrival, and I was quite shocked to see a bald old man ready to hand over a book I really wanted to read. Was I surprised? Yes, but I also had not read the novel yet, so yeah. I must admit, the book really shook me. I felt confused, disturbed, and if I'm honest, a little fascinated. That's the danger of the novel. It's written beautifully, but it manipulates you. It seduces the reader much like Humbert seduces the viewer, the world, and most horrifically, Dolores Hayes. I know many people, especially my peers, don't really read anymore, so for most of us, Lolita lives on in film adaptations, especially in the 1997 version directed by Adrian Lyne. That version brings the novel's aestheticization of predatory behaviors to life in troubling ways. I'll be referring to both the literary and cinematic versions because both have shaped the cultural understanding of what it is to be a nymphette. If you've never read the novel, here's what you should know. The term nymphette is used by Humbert to describe a girl who's aged 9 to 14, and he claims this girl possesses a special kind of beauty. This beauty is one that's not recognized by most. To him, though, a nymphette isn't just a child. She's a rare object of desire. He believes he can spot one in any crowd, based on her posture, her laugh, and the way she interacts with others. But in truth, the label says nothing about the girl herself. It's all about how she's perceived, and how she becomes a projection of adult fantasy, a mirror for male obsession. This is where we can finally begin our deep dive. When a relationship between an adult and a child is portrayed in film or literature, the way it's styled matters just as much as the plot. In the 1997 adaptation of Lolita, we're immersed in soft lighting, hazy cinematography, and romantic piano scores. Humbert narrates the story in a poetic and wistful tone. He reflects on Dolores, his victim, with a kind of reverence that almost masks the horrors of what he's actually doing. We don't really see abuse, we see longing, and we see a man in pain, a man tortured by his emotions, and the camera lingers not on Dolores' fear, but rather it lingers on her lips, her smile, the swing of her skirt, and so the viewers are lulled into a feeling of sympathy for poor old Humbert Humbert. This kind of depicts how predation becomes beautiful. This is how abuse is reframed into desire. And when that happens, it doesn't just affect how we interpret the film, but it also affects how we interpret reality. Consider this one, the most quoted line from the movie.
Well, what'd you expect?
I was a daisy fresh girl, and look what you've done to me. Dolores says this line in the film, and it is currently trending on TikTok. It's been used in nearly 7,000 videos. This line was meant to show the aftermath of a young girl realizing her innocence was stolen, but now it's used as a soundbite, a trend, and a backdrop to fashion transitions and flirtatious glances. And that's the power of aestheticization. It numbs up the horror and it turns abuse into art. And we often unknowingly become part of the performance. We share the clips, we repeat the lines, and we romanticize the damage. It's important to note that this isn't just about Lolita. It's about a much larger media phenomenon, where sexual violence is romanticized and male desire is treated as something beautiful, no matter how dark it becomes. We need to ask why. Why is it more comfortable to view a predator's desire through a soft focus lens than to confront the damage left behind? Because aesthetics have the power to disguise truth, and in the case of predation, that disguise is costing us clarity, and costing many girls their safety and their well-being. Now let's shift the focus to the way modern media continues this pattern, not just through aesthetics, but through narrative structure, character development, and the pervasive tragic muse trope. The three core case studies that I'll be using are films and novels that I have read before and found incredibly intriguing. Number 1 is Miller's Girl, a movie produced in 2023. Number 2 is a novel by Kate Elizabeth Russell called My Dark Vanessa. And lastly is White Oleander by Janet Fitch. Each of these works centers on a young girl or a teenage protagonist involved in an inappropriate and often exploitative relationship with an older man. But what connects them all is this: the girl doesn't always see herself as a victim. In My Dark Vanessa, the protagonist, Vanessa, details her affair with her high school teacher as an adult. Throughout the novel, she constantly questions whether what happened was abuse, because at the time it didn't feel like abuse, it felt like romance, it felt like being special, and that's exactly what makes these stories so haunting. The male perpetrator was very similar to Humbert. He was very intelligent, and in the novel he graduates from Harvard, and yet he still takes advantage of a young girl despite his academic excellence. This kind of portrays how young girls will justify their abuse and claim themselves to not be victims because they desired what was occurring to them. Let's be honest, many of us have grown up with the idea that if an older man is interested in us, it's flattering. It means we're mature and it means that we're different. The girl in these stories is never just a teenager. She's just wise beyond her years, not like others, old-souled, and she's framed as someone who gets it. I know many of us who have read the Lolita novel or watched the film have always questioned whether we're getting it the way we need to. Some people might have had different experiences and have totally been repulsed by the movie, while others, like myself, have seen the movie multiple times because of its hazy cinematography and romantic views. In My Dark Vanessa, she is someone who could keep up with adult desires, and the world rewards that performance. In so many narratives, the girl who catches the eye of an older man is elevated. She's portrayed as intriguing and seductive, even as an artist or a muse. Her youth isn't seen as a reason to protect her, it's seen as a reason to want her more. Let's go back to Miller's Girl. In the film, the main character is a talented writer, and her teacher encourages her gift. There's an emotional closeness, a creative bond, and a blurred line between mentorship and manipulation. But the film doesn't treat the teacher as dangerous. It treats him as a man who couldn't help himself, as if he were the one seduced. And the girl? She's seen as someone who knows exactly what she's doing. This narrative flips the power dynamic in a subtle but insidious way. It turns abuse into a mutual secret. It reframes grooming as a forbidden love story, and it conditions viewers, especially young girls, to believe that being wanted by an older man is kind of a power. It's a trap disguised as a coming-of-age story. Now finally, let's talk about White Oleander, a book I recently read but I found increasingly intriguing and very well written. Astrid, the teenage protagonist, is repeatedly placed into situations where older men find her different from other girls her age, and while the novel beautifully captures her inner world, her longing, her confusion, her desperation for love, it also shows how being sexualized at a young age becomes part of how she survives. It becomes her kind of currency. And this is the tragedy. Many girls feel like they have to grow up too fast, to be palatable to a world that doesn't want to protect them. It wants to possess them. This leads us to a deeply important question. Why do so many girls feel older than their age? Why do they feel emotionally disconnected from their peers? And why do they only feel seen when they are sexualized? This is something a lot of us have felt, but we didn't always have words for it. Feeling like you've been through too much, too young. Feeling like other girls are carefree and you're already calculating your worth in glances and compliments. And predators, especially older men, can see that. They can sense that emotional isolation, that feeling of being different, and they exploit it. Because when a girl doesn't feel understood by people her own age, and then someone older comes along and does seem to understand her, it feels powerful. It feels like being chosen in a way. But it's not love, it's manipulation. It's about control masquerading as care. And this is where mass media has failed us again and again. It blurs the lines between abuse and intimacy. It confuses predation for protection, and it packages it all as poetry. And we need to ask ourselves, why are stories still being told this way? Why do we still center the male experience of desire and the female experience of being desired as the central dynamic of drama and tragedy? And more urgently, what happens when real girls watching these stories unfold start to think they should want the same thing? Now let's turn our attention to male desire, specifically how it's framed in media and how it informs the way society perceives these relationships. It's important to recognize that the way male predators are depicted in media is vastly different from how they manifest in real life. The gap between fiction and reality is crucial when analyzing the cultural myths surrounding age gap relationships, because it distorts the public's perception of what's really acceptable. In literature and film, the older man is often depicted as a complex and tortured figure. He's charismatic, and he's intelligent. He's charming with a kind of existential sadness that makes him more relatable, more human in a way. This romanticized depiction of predators often portrays them as men who are in search of something pure, something that can save them from their own isolation. In many ways, they're constructed as tragic heroes, and we, the audience, are invited to sympathize with them, as if their pursuit of a much younger woman is part of their redemption arc. Think about Humber in Lolita. He's articulate, he's cultured, and a man of great intellectual capacity, but he's also deeply lonely and disillusioned. This novel is written from his perspective, so we hear his lyrical, almost poetic justifications for his actions. It really does humanize him. It makes us question, is he really a villain, or is he just a victim of his own desires? But here's the thing, this is really a distortion. In real life, male predators who prey on young women do not look like Humber whatsoever. They're ordinary men who lack charm or sophistication. In the most brutal depiction of this reality, To Catch a Predator shows us the ugly truth. The men who get caught in these sting operations are not tragically misunderstood figures. They're creepy, they're unremarkable, and they're disturbingly common. What does this say about the power of media in shaping our views on relationships, particularly those with significant age gaps? Why is it that in fiction, these men are often framed as possessing an air of mystery, when in reality they're exposed as predators with nothing more than a facade of charm? The glamorization of older men in these relationships fosters a societal double standard. It implies that a man's desire for a young woman is natural, even desirable. It suggests that there's something fundamentally alluring about youth, especially when it's packaged as innocence. But what's really going on is that older man is exploiting the power imbalance between him and the young girl. He doesn't see her as a whole person. He doesn't recognize her autonomy. She's a symbol to him, of youth, of beauty, of purity, and also a commodity for him to possess. Yet this is a narrative that is continually celebrated in popular culture. In film, television, and literature, we are shown that the older man's desire is framed as something that transcends morality. It's framed as a tragic romance, and this narrative is so pervasive that it's ingrained in how we view not just relationships, but also gender and power. Take, for instance, the portrayal of male predators in film. These men are often given layers and layers and layers of depth. They might be tragic figures who've suffered in their own right. Maybe they're misunderstood geniuses, or perhaps they're simply looking for love in all of the wrong places. But the question is, why are we, the audience, asked to sympathize with these men? Why is their suffering so important, while the suffering of the girls they target is minimized or ignored? In contrast, real-life predators are exposed for their ugliness. They're caught in the act, often in deeply embarrassing ways. The To Catch a Predator series serves as a stark reminder of the dissonance between the romanticized figure of the old man and the grim reality of what these relationships truly represent. When we watch shows like To Catch a Predator, it's very easy to be horrified. The predators are exposed as nothing more than middle-aged men, lurking behind computer screens, trying to lure in vulnerable, impressionable girls. But in the media landscape, this truth gets buried under layers of romance and nostalgia. The reality is masked by the fiction. In fiction, the older man is often given a pass. In real life, we see that the consequences are much harsher and much clearer. This double standard becomes even more dangerous when you consider how society responds to these relationships. The media often questions the motives of the older woman who engages with a younger man, but when the roles are reversed, the older man's actions are normalized or even romanticized. This creates a dangerous precedent where the victimhood of young girls is often overlooked, while the desires of older men are celebrated. I'd like to put in these screen captures of comments I saw of an edit of Humber under a Lolita TikTok I saw on my For You page. I think it's quite interesting how Humbert and the actor are very much romanticized, even when he plays such a disgusting role. I just wanted to share those because I find them very odd. I know some of them are claiming that they have no bad intentions behind their comments, but in my eyes, there is an element of romanticization when considering your perceptions of the actor. Why do we accept the tortured genius as a viable explanation for predatory behavior, while the reality of exploitation is seen as something to be ashamed of? The answer lies in the fact that society has a long-standing history of romanticizing male desire while demonizing female autonomy. When an older man is the predator, the story often becomes about his redemption, his love, and his search for meaning. But when the roles are reversed, the narrative becomes about the female victim and the focus is the damage on her. And more importantly, we really need to stop excusing it because of the cultural myths we've built around male desire. Now we've come to one of the most critical and often overlooked aspects of this issue, how girls, especially young girls, lose their voices in the narrative surrounding sexualization. In many of these stories, the girl is presented as the passive recipient of male desire. She's objectified and sexualized, and worst of all, her inner turmoil is often ignored. What these narratives fail to capture is the psychological damage that occurs when young girls are taught to see themselves primarily through the lens of male desire. It's not just the external impact of being sexualized, it is the internal chaos, it's the identity crisis, and it's also the emotional damage that goes unacknowledged. What's dangerous about these media portrayals is how they perpetuate a world where girls growing up believing their worth is intrinsically linked to their sexual value. From a very young age, girls are taught to perform for the gaze of men, whether it's in how they dress, how they act, or how they view their own bodies. This isn't just a narrative that exists in movies or books, it's a lived reality for so many young girls. Consider social media today. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok become central to young people's lives, particularly for girls. These platforms are built on attention, likes, comments, and followers that give a sense of validation. But what happens when the most valued form of validation comes from how sexualized you appear online? A pressure manifests to perform and to be desired. Many girls who are still developing emotionally and psychologically are bombarded with these messages that their value comes from their looks, their bodies, and how well they can attract attention, especially from adult men. And let's be clear, this is not just an isolated issue or something that affects only a few people. The normalization of this behavior is widespread. Social media platforms actively encourage girls to put themselves on display in ways that are explicitly sexualized, all while making them believe it's empowering. But here's the truth, it's not empowering, it's exploitative. Even on platforms like which are often framed as a means of empowerment for women, we can see this troubling trend. Girls, often underage, are encouraged to monetize their bodies, sometimes if they aren't fully aware of the long-term psychological and emotional toll this could take. The message is clear. To be a woman in the world today means to be objectified, sexualized, and at times commodified. This narrative is far from empowering. It's actually a denial of girls' autonomy and subjectivity. It strips them of their voices, leaving them as mere objects of desire. Instead of being seen as whole individuals with a range of experiences, girls are reduced to their physicality, their bodies, their looks, and their ability to attract. The girls in these narratives, whether in Lolita, My Dark Vanessa, or even Cairo Sweet and Miller's Girl, don't get to voice their pain. They don't get to speak about their trauma. Their experiences are not framed as an act of survival, but as an act of seduction. They are presented as willing participants in a relationship they don't fully understand, leaving them vulnerable and emotionally fragmented. The loss of a voice is not just a loss of power, it's a loss of agency. It's a loss of the ability to express what's truly happening, what it feels like, and how it hurts. This is a consistent pattern across media. When young girls are sexualized, when their bodies are commodified, they don't have the choice to speak for themselves. The narrative is always controlled by someone else, whether it's the male predator, the media creator, or the broader cultural forces that demand women and girls to remain silent about their experiences. But perhaps even more troubling is the way this affects the way other people, especially other girls, see themselves. We're told that women and girls have the power to control their sexuality. And in a sense, yes, that's true, but this narrative becomes incredibly damaging when it's paired with a culture that constantly pushes girls to perform sexualized behaviors for the male gaze. This empowerment becomes another form of control, a way to keep them trapped in the cycle of validation seeking without truly exploring what it means to be empowered. This dynamic extends beyond social media too. In many traditional forms of media, film, television, music videos, girls are presented as objects of male desire. Think about how many famous pop stars have been sexualized from a young age. Britney Spears, for example, was thrust into the public eye at 16 years old, and her entire career was built on her sexualization. She is marketed as the epitome of innocence and lust, her sexuality ripe for consumption by the media and the public. But what does this message ultimately send to young girls? That their worth is tied to how attractive they are to men? That they are only valuable when they are desirable to someone else? In doing so, we lose the opportunity to teach girls what true empowerment is, to value themselves for their intellect, their compassion, and their talents. Instead, we condition them to measure their worth by how many likes or comments they ultimately get. From movies to music videos, girls are consistently shown as objects for male validation, often with little to no regard for their own inner world. This constant dehumanization builds a framework where girls begin to believe they are only as good as the attention they receive, and that the greatest form of power they can have is through sexual appeal. Now that we've discussed the loss of voice and the psychological damage caused by these media portrayals, we need to address the broader cultural conditions that enable the Lolita effect to persist in the first place. There are deeply ingrained societal norms and structural factors at play that perpetuate these dynamics and make the sexualization of young girls so normalized. One key factor is the absence of positive father figures in many young girls' lives. In the absence of these role models, many girls look to older men for validation. The relationship between a father and daughter can be instrumental in shaping how a girl understands her worth. And when that's missing, she might turn to other sources for emotional affirmation, and sources that are often manipulative or predatory. This dynamic plays into the broader cultural issues of mother-daughter relationships as well. Too often, these relationships are fraught with competition rather than support. Instead of nurturing an environment of understanding where a mother can impart the wisdom that comes from her own experiences, there is often a toxic competition. This can manifest in how girls see themselves as they grow older, feeling that they must compete with adult women, both in terms of beauty and desirability. Society glorifies youth and youthfulness, so girls are made to feel that their worth is best expressed in their sexual appeal and innocence, something adult women can no longer embody. At the same time, we see the media's failure to critique predatory behavior directly. The media far too often glosses over the damaging aspects of sexual exploitation in favor of glamorizing it. In films like Miller's Girl, both female leads view seducing older men, including teachers, as a source of power. These men are not seen as creepy or harmful, but instead they are charmed by the lure of the girls. This is where the glamorization begins. It transforms the predatory behavior into something romantic and even powerful for the young girls involved. There's another cultural condition we must address: the way Western media often contrasts the cheapness of American culture with the idealization of the exotic or French woman as explored by Nabokov in Lolita. There's a paradox here in the way we view youth and sexuality. On one hand, we fetishize it, presenting young girls as figures of purity, innocence, and mystery, while simultaneously exploiting and commodifying these traits in the media. On the other hand, we demonize the older women, especially one who is sexual or who engages in similar relationships with younger men. This double standard serves to heighten the exploitation of young girls, especially when these relationships are framed in such a seductive, glamorous light. In some cases, it's almost impossible to recognize predation for what it truly is, because it's so often dressed up in the trappings of romance and allure. So what we have here is a cultural system that encourages the sexualization of youth, romanticizes the pursuit of younger girls by older men, and leaves no space for a genuine, critical analysis of these harmful dynamics. It's a system that elevates age gap relationships to the level of mythic romance. It turns them into something desirable rather than something deeply disturbing and intensely harmful. Now, let's take a moment to look at the real-world implications of the Lolita effect. Specifically, how does the media's portrayal of predatory relationships translate into the way young people experience the world? Studies show that young girls who are exposed to sexualized media are far more likely to experience body image issues, low self-esteem, and even depression. In fact, exposure to sexualized images has been linked to an increased likelihood of risky sexual behaviors in adolescence. This isn't just about the effects of being sexualized. They come to view their worth as linked to their appearance, and this can drastically impact their mental health. Now let's look at the consumption of adult media. Research shows that the vast majority of internet pornography is focused on youth and the idea of first time. In fact, many of the most searched terms in pornography are related to youth, innocence, and virginity. Words like teen, young, first time, and innocent. These terms feed into a larger cultural narrative about how sexual desire being closely linked to youth further normalizes the idea that young girls are the object of male desire. The fact that these words are so pervasive and so often tied to sexual fantasies speaks volumes about the way the Lolita effect continues to shape societal views on sexuality. It contributes to a dangerous myth that the younger a girl is, the more desirable and valuable she is. The long-term consequences of this normalization of youth and sexuality is that girls internalize this desire for male validation from an early age. They grow up learning that they must perform sexualized behaviors to be seen as valuable. These narratives are echoed in music videos, movies, advertisements, and even the way we socialize girls from a young age. From Barbie dolls to beauty pageants, the message is clear. Your worth is tied to how others perceive your beauty and your desirability. So how do we begin to challenge these harmful narratives? The first step is acknowledging the depth of the problem. We need to stop romanticizing age gap relationships and the predatory behaviors that accompany them. We must confront the media's role in perpetuating these myths and start questioning how stories are told, especially whose voice is missing from the narrative. The next time we engage with a story, whether in a book, a movie, or a social media post, we need to ask ourselves, who exactly is telling the story, and what perspectives are we being shown? And critically, who is being silenced in this narrative? When we fail to hear the voices of young girls, when we fail to show their pain, their trauma, and their agency, we continue to perpetuate the Lolita. But most importantly, we must support young girls in finding their voice, not just in resisting objectification, but embracing their full humanity. Girls deserve to be seen as complex individuals with ambitions, talents, and potential beyond their appearance or their ability to attract attention. To close, I encourage you to reflect on how this issue has shaped your own views. We all have to play a part in changing the cultural narratives that contribute to the normalization of predation. It starts with us, being more critical of what we consume and understanding that the romanticization of predatory behaviors in media is not something to be glorified. It's something we must actively challenge, really for the sake of future generations. Alright, thank you so much for watching and listening to my thoughts. I have so much to say all the time. So I'm going to pretend like this is a real YouTube video and say like, comment, and share. Oh, oops. And subscribe. I forgot to say that. Bye!